Hello viewers, now taking you through the story for A-level mathematics, and this video is suitable for students in senior 6 preparing for their Uneb of 2022. So if you're in senior 6 currently, this video is suitable for you. So this video is made when I'm aware that there are some students whose schools were lucky enough to bring facilitators to talk to them, and also there are those whose schools did not get facilitators to talk to them. So this video is there to bridge that gap, so that even if you didn't get facilitators to come to your school and tell you some of the requirements which are needed as you sit for your Uneb, you can pick something, and actually you will not be far from other students. So I'll begin with some of the general remarks or some of the requirements which are needed as long as you are going to sit for A-level mathematics, and we shall briefly talk about them. So these are the very things we talk about when you go for facilitations. So even if you don't get facilitators to talk to you, this video is there to bridge that gap. So one of the things you need is high level of accuracy, preferably by means of fraction or to 4 decimal places unless specified. So in an exam, there are some times when they will specify, they will say give you answer to 3 decimal places or 2 decimal places. In that, you don't follow this rule, but if they don't, you have to either use a fraction or to 4 decimal places. However, there are some special cases where we alter this rule number 1, and that is in angles. So when you calculate and get an angle, the angle has to be 2 decimal places. And also questions of price indices in Math Paper 2 are to 2 decimal places. If you give more than 2, it is okay, but we strictly want 2. So angles, remember to put the 2 decimal places. Price indices, remember to put 2 decimal places. Also, another special case is on Spearman's rank correlation coefficient in paper 2. That one, even if we prefer fraction form as an answer, in this part of Spearman's, we don't need a fraction form. So it has to be a decimal. Now, why do we need decimal? It is because in your tables, mathematical tables, that part of correlation coefficient which you use to comment has values in decimal places. That means that if you give your answer to fraction form, you'll not be able to comment correctly. So Spearman's fraction form is not needed. And also another special case is when the answer has a surd. So if it is a fraction, for example, 2 over, let me write here, 2 over root 3. So if you leave your answer in that form, it is not okay. You have to go ahead and rationalize, because a surd can never be left in the denominator. So you have to rationalize by multiplying both up and down by root 3, so that you remove the surd from the denominator. The another thing we need to see is correct substitution in correct concepts. So this is where marking begins. So as long as you substitute correctly and in a correct concept, then they will be able to get your mark. And remember, we mark in a chronological order. In other words, we mark in a flow. Therefore, as you present your work, it must be step by step. Then another thing we need is precise and clean work. So be precise, meaning you only write what they want. Some students are funny. If a question has more than 2 approaches, they will come and say method 1, then they write the solution. Method 2, they write the solution. That is not needed in this Uneb exam you are going for. So even if the question has more than 1 method, choose only one and use that. Don't show the examiner that you know a lot. And clean work means you don't overcross. Some students write question, for example, question 9 part A, they answer it. When they reach part B, they realize it's a little hard, so they cross the whole question. that is not needed. We expect you to take some 5 minutes to read through all the questions, read through all the parts, and know and be able to choose wisely which question to attempt and which not to attempt, so that you don't over cross along the way. So follow instructions. Read the question at least 2 times while underlining the keywords. So here, some students, when they reach a topic, especially the topic they know best, they only read halfway and they start answering. And that affects them because some questions at the very end, they say, give your answer to 2 decimal places, for example. So if you don't read to the end, it means that you will not see this accuracy that you want. Therefore, you leave your answer to 4 decimal places, which is rule number 1. Yet here they will have specified. That is why you have said unless specified. So when they specify, remember to give your answer to the required accuracy. But if you don't read the question to the end, then you can't know. Others will read the question and fail to interpret it. They will misinterpret it and write the solution wrong, give a wrong solution. So make sure you read the question correct to the full and underline the keywords so that you know what the question really wants. Then mind units in mechanics. So in other parts, we may not mind the units. For example, in probability and statistics, they can give you the height of students in centimeters. Then they ask for mean. It is okay to give your mean or variance or standard deviation without units. But when it comes to mechanics, the units must be seen. Without units, marks have already gone. Proper selection of numbers. So you expect you to take some time to select your numbers wisely and start from the one you know best. Follow in descending order like that. Don't say that this one I know question 9 very well, let me write it last. No, that doesn't work. So make sure you start with what you know best in that order, so that you give an examiner an impression that you are really a mathematician. If an examiner starts right away by crossing you, question 1 cross, question 2 cross, question 3 cross, you have already triggered his mind to think that you cannot get a better grade. But if he starts by ticking you, it means that his mind is triggered that you can get a better grade. If you read somewhere and you misfire, he will take time to read through and see why you misfired. But if you start by crossing, it means that he will take less time to mark your paper and give it less attention. Avoid rubric infringement. This means that you answer more than the questions they want. Usually, the questions they want in math paper in math are standard. 8 questions in section A, they are all compulsory, but in section B, you choose only 5. Now, if by mistake you do 6 questions, that is already rubric infringement. You are not obeying the rules. So make sure you only and only answer 5 questions in section B. Then we expect you to go with some of the mathematical equipments. This is because in an exam of Uneb, we don't expect any borrowing. You cannot borrow a calculator. You cannot borrow a long ruler. You cannot borrow a mathematical table. You cannot borrow a mathematical set. So whatever you need in an exam, make sure you go with them. Some students are funny. When the paper begins, after 30 minutes, they put up their hands and say, I need to borrow a pen. That is not allowed. So make sure you go with an extra pen and go with a pen which has dark ink. Why? Because the day you do an exam is not the day your paper is marked. They have to first go and keep them somewhere. Then when the term closes, they start the process of marking. Usually they begin with PLE, followed by UCE, and then USCE. So USCE is the last, meaning that a lot of time will have passed. And as time passes, if you use that pen with a light ink, maybe the ink will begin to fade away, and there you will have began to lose marks, because the examiner will be straining his or her eyes to find out what you really were writing. So I encourage you to go with pens with dark ink. And pens with dark ink are the ones with big pens. So don't be so unique. You say that, for me, I'm of a high class, I can't use a big pen. No, make sure you use a big pen, because those ones are well trusted. Their ink does not fade. I think you must have realized it along the way as you have been making notes in your books. There are some pens you use, and after a month or after a few weeks, the ink begins to fade. So that such pens, avoid them. That is about a pen. What about a ruler? A ruler has to be reasonably new. I encourage you, if possible, you buy a new ruler when you are going for an exam. Why? Because if it is not new, it will have some roughness. And for example, imagine if you are drawing an axis and we see something like this. Because of a ruler which is not new, then you will have begun to lose marks. As we shall see when we are breaking down topic by topic, we shall realize that such axes, all the marks will be lost. Then that was about a ruler. What about a calculator? For a calculator, we encourage you to have don't borrow the calculator on the day of an exam. It's better if you have a calculator a week before and you use it for practice in case you plan to borrow. The reason is, there are two reasons. One is because some buttons in the calculator are hard, and from experience, the buttons which are very hard to press are the zero button, and it's because they are usually pressed frequently, the zero button and equal sign button. So you may press the calculator as 0 and you think it has gone on the screen, yet it has not gone. Or you press an equal sign, you think it has gone, and yet it has not gone. So make sure that you get used to the calculator before you go for an exam, so that you can know the buttons which are hard to press, and also the buttons which are sensitive. Some buttons are very sensitive. You press a 1 once on the screen, it goes there twice. So such calculators, you need to be keen of them, so that the calculator doesn't become the reason of your failing. Okay, that's the calculator. We talk about a ruler. Now mathematical table. So these mathematical logbooks, they are provided by Uneb, and Uneb borrows them from the library. You are not supposed to go with your logbooks, and the reason is because some students are funny. They realize that a certain formula is not there in the logbook. So what they do, they squeeze it somewhere in ink, in their pens. That is already an examination malpractice. So it's for this reason that it is Uneb which will go to the library of the school and borrow the mathematical logbooks and come and gives it to the students. So you are entitled to these logbooks, and if you don't have them, it is better you raise up your hand in an exam and ask for them. That is it. Then the mathematical set, what I can talk about it is that the set ruler in this mathematical set is not enough. Some students, when they say a ruler in this mathematical set, they forget about a long ruler. But in math, we need a long ruler. Actually, we need more than a mathematical set ruler. So briefly, that is it. Those are the general remarks. Now we are going to break down these papers and also break down these topics. If you have been following my videos, you are aware of what all these words mean. But because these are the highlights or the last words as we go for the paper, we shall break them down and remind you what we have been talking about on this platform. so that even that one who's watching this video, who's on this platform for the first time, can pick something that can help him in his or her Uneb. So in math, we have two papers, paper 1 and paper 2. Paper 1 is what we call pure mathematics, and paper 2 is what we call applied mathematics. Paper 1 has 5 themes, and paper 2 has 3 themes. So let's start begin with paper 1, and this is how a standard paper will look like. In algebra, there are topics in algebra as we shall look through as we're going through this video, but what you should remember is that in algebra, 2 questions come in section A and 2 in section B. Calculus, 3 questions come in section A and 3 in section B. We shall see what calculus is as we proceed with this video. Vectors has 1 in section A, 1 in section B. Trigonometry, 1 section A, 1 section B. Geometry, 1 section A, 1 section B. So if you add up all these ones, you get a total of 8, which should be in section A. And if you add up all these ones, you get a total of 8, which should be in section B. Section A, all are compulsory. Section B, you attempt any 5. It is up to you to choose any 5 you want. You may choose to first do these ones 5 and ignore these others. It is okay. You may choose to do all these ones and this one and ignore this one. It is okay. So it is up to you. What you want to choose is what you choose, provided you do not exceed the 5 questions. Then that is math paper 1. Then math paper 2, there are 3 themes. 1 is statistics and probability, where 3 come in section A and 3 in section B. We shall break this down as we proceed with the video. Another one is numerical methods, where 2 come in section A and 2 in section B. And the last one is mechanics. Now this mechanics is wide, but the good thing is that they also further divide it into 3 parts. There are some topics in mechanics which are under kinematics, and there 1 comes in section A, 1 in section B. We shall see those topics as we proceed. Others are under statics, 1 in section A, 1 in section B. And the last ones are under dynamics, 1 in section A, 1 in section B. So that gives you the total. If you add these ones, you will get a total of 8 in section A and a total of 8 in section B. And still the same instruction works. You are supposed to answer not more than 5 in section A and all in section B. Sorry, all should be answered in section A and not more than 5 in section B. So that is a brief skeleton of what paper 1 will look like and what paper 2 will look like. Now we shall begin to break down our topics or our themes. The first theme was algebra, and we said in algebra 2 come in section A and 2 in section B. The topics in algebra can be broken down into parts. The first part has simultaneous equations, and if you are keen with Uneb of the previous 3 years or 5 years, they have been bringing simultaneous equations involving quadratic equations. Previously, they used to bring simultaneous equations with 3 unknowns, x, y, and z, and they were linear. But nowadays they bring equations with quadratics, in other words, when they have powers. So you should learn how to solve equations with quadratics. Then another topic is polynomials and quadratics, which involve, so we need to know how to expand cubes and squares. Another one is binomial expansion. So that is in part 1. Another part has topics like indices, sides and logarithms, series, but for your year you will ignore proof by induction. And complex numbers, in your year you will ignore demo V's and sketching regions. Then the other topics can be permutation and combination and inequalities. So I've distributed them in order of their relevancy. We expect all of you to know this for you to get a question in algebra, and also we expect you to get to know this to get another question in algebra. But if you want excellency, you can also go through this. But these first two are essential. In other words, they are the basics in algebra. So all students are encouraged to know them. If you feel you are going to do only one in section B of algebra, then understanding one of the parts is okay. But we encourage you to do 2 questions in algebra, and that is, you need to know part A and also part B. And if you want excellency, you can also add on these ones. So now we shall go through some of the challenges in algebra. So as we mark Uneb, there are some challenges we highlight, or there are some challenges Uneb highlights. These challenges are available on the Uneb website if you need them, but now because we are time barred, we shall highlight some of the common ones topic by topic. So simultaneous equations, these are some of the challenges. One is failure to expand correctly the expression after substitution. Remember I told you simultaneous equations, the ones they currently bring, have the powers. So if I for example I make x the subject, if I say y is equal to x plus 2 in one equation, I'll have to come and substitute here, and I'll have to expand. Now that expansion is what disturbs students. So you need to know the expansion of a plus b squared and also a minus b squared for you to be able to pass such questions of simultaneous equations. Then also simplifying is a problem, expressing the equations in one variable. After substituting, you have to simplify. That is also a problem. The another one is solving quadratic equations. Some students, it is true, you have good calculators, and we encourage you to have good calculators. And such calculators can solve quadratic equations. But we don't expect you to use those calculators directly to solve quadratic equations without showing the method. Remember, in math we give method marks, so you have to know, you have to show how you are solving the quadratic. And when we were beginning, I told you we need to see correct substitution in correct concepts. So such reasons cannot allow you to just use a calculator to get the answer for a quadratic equation. You have to show the method, either factorization or quadratic formula. That is simultaneous equations. What about quadratics and polynomials? So failure to identify the sum of roots of the given equation. Remember, sum has a negative b over a. So this negative is what disturbs many students. They ignore it and everything is now no longer okay. Then also obtaining the sum of the new roots, still the negative is what disturbs them. The product is okay because it is positive c over a. But when it comes to the sum, that one there's a lot of problems. Writing a proper quadratic equation, it's also a problem because the quadratic equation is x squared minus the sum. So this minus also disturbs students. They put a plus, which is never okay. Then failure to interpret the question correctly. So you'll go through, I encourage you to go through this question of 2015 9A. Some students interpret the question wrongly and it leads to loss of marks. failure to complete squares and to use completing squares to determine maximum and minimum. Some students fear completing squares. So if you don't know the method of completing, in this year 2018, they restricted candidates. They had to use completing squares to get maximum and minimum. Remember, maximum and minimum can be got either by differentiation or by completing squares. But this year they restricted candidates that they must use completing squares. So that put many candidates off. So I encourage you to learn how to complete squares. Okay, that was quadratics and polynomials. What about binomial expansion? Binomial expansion, the challenge is expanding to the required number of terms. Most students know how to expand because the formula for expansion is there in your logbooks. But the problem is counting the number of terms. Some students don't count this one as a term. They begin from this and count it as 1, then they go to x squared as the second term and x cubed as the third term. So if a question wants 3 terms, start from 1 to count. This is 1 term, second term, third term, and you stop here. Don't exceed. The moment you exceed, already marks have gone. Then failure to identify the value of x in the evaluation. So sometimes the value of x, I encourage you to look through the question of 2020 of Uneb. Sometimes the value of x, obtaining it requires you to first factorize. In that year it was 144.0144. And they wanted you to get the value of that. So such question, it means you have to first factorize out the 144. But if you don't, then you cannot get the value of x. So it disturbs candidates in that year. Then also failure to distinguish between significant figures and decimal places. So by now we expect you to know the difference between significant figures and decimal places. Because if you don't know the difference, then you cannot get the last accuracy mark. So the very last mark you get depends on the accuracy they have given in the question. So advice is that in binomial expansion, as long as it's a quotient, it must first be expressed as a product. Sometimes they can give 1 plus ax over 1 plus bx. Then they put it under a square root. This is a quotient, but for you to do binomial expansion, it has to be a product. So use the laws of indices to make it a product. Then also, I will advise you to use a binomial formula from the mathematical table. This formula is there in the mathematical table, but if you quote a wrong formula, yet you have a mathematical table, there the examiner has no mercy. Okay, that was part 1. Part 2 had indices and sides and logarithms. So here the challenge is failure to apply the laws of logarithms and of indices. Another challenge is failure to form quadratic equations. You can see this here. Usually this quadratic equation is under indices. They can give 2 to power x, 2 to power 2x like that, and where you have to form a quadratic equation and solve it. Then also solving a quadratic equation, most students want to use a calculator, which is never okay. Now shall go to series. Series 1 is incorrect use of the formula. So you have to know, you have to first identify whether it's a GP or an AP, otherwise you'll use a wrong formula. So some candidates use the formula for finding the nth term instead of formula for sum of the first n term. So incorrect use of formula leads to loss of marks. And that arises from not using a mathematical logbook to get the formula. So that was algebra. Let's go to calculus. Calculus, there are 3 questions in section A, 3 in section B. So the first part is differentiation. We need to know all the differentiation of which was covered in senior 5. Because a question will come from there. Differentiation of exponentials and natural logarithms, and differentiation of trig functions. The next part is integration. All integration of senior 5 is needed. Integration of trig functions, integration by recognizing presence of function and its derivative, integration by change of variable, integration by using natural logarithms, integration by parts, integration of exponential functions, integration of scalars with variable powers. So I've looked at all these methods on this platform. Integration involving partial fractions, and lastly DEs. But in DEs, we ignore those questions which require integration, which was removed. Remember, there are some integrations which were removed based on the abridged curriculum. So on this platform, we have already talked about the abridged curriculum, so you can go back and look through that video for more clarification. But here, we shall just list down some of the topics. One was integrations involving such. Then integration of inverse trig, integration involving use of T formula, curve sketching of rational functions, and DEs which require the ignored integration, so you can ignore those parts and the calculus. The most common challenge in questions involving calculus is leaving out the integral coefficient and the constant of integration. Most students, after writing the integral sign, they forget to put a dx at the end here. That makes everything not okay, because we have to know with respect to what are you integrating. Then if the integral is indefinite, then you have to put a constant of integration. So this and this are more ignored in Uneb, and students lose marks because there's no way we can award marks without those. Another challenge is failure to come out with a suitable approach. As we have seen in the previous slide, there are a number of methods or approaches to answer trig functions, but each function requires a special method of approach. So if you just do by trial and error or by guesswork, then it will not help you in this integration. So you have to be able to look at the integral and find out or be able to realize which method is suitable. So some of the challenges on integration 1 is use of the laws of indices. So integration 1 is the one you covered in senior 5. You can look through the question of 2016, question 13a. Then integration of trig functions, the challenge is use of factor formula to split the given product in the integral. You can look at this question. So remember, you cannot integrate a trig function when it is a product. You have to first split it using factor formula, and that splitting using factor formula is a challenge to many candidates. Failure to use radians for limits. As long as it's integration and there's a trig function, the calculator must be set to radians. The integration by change of variable, the common challenge is identifying a suitable substitution. What should you let to be u? That one is a big challenge. Another one is failure to change limits. So when you change the variable, you also have to change the limits. If you don't, then it is not correct math. Then failure to use the new limits is also a challenge. So whenever change of variable is required for a definite integral, limits must be changed at that point. Don't wait to the end when you want to substitute the limits. You must change at the very point when you change the variable. The integration by parts, where the most big challenge is choice of the part to differentiate and the part to integrate. So what to let to be u and what to let to be dvdx is a big challenge to many candidates. Then failure to use repeated integration by parts. So in this year, the integration by parts was repeated. You can look through e.t.c. These are the ones which involve exponentials. So always identify a suitable identity that could be easily integrated. Otherwise, you will get stuck along the way. When you go to partial fractions, one is failure to resolve the given function into partial fractions. Remember, there are three types. There's a part with repeated factors, others with distinct factors, another one with a quadratic. So you have to know how to resolve into partial fractions. So in these years, 2020 and 2015, they brought the type with repeated factors. Failure to evaluate. So like I told you, you have to read the question to the end, because sometimes they specify the accuracy they want. In this year of 2020, the accuracy was 3 decimal places, but students could not round off. Failure to interpret the constant equal to 0. So in this year, still 2020, one of the constant, actually b, was equal to 0. So some candidates still wanted to integrate it, that integral of 0 over a given function, which is never okay. So I encourage you to have in mind all the three types of partial fractions, because such questions come with 12 marks. Now we shall go to trigonometry. Trigonometry, the common challenges are: 1. Use of calculator to solve intermediate quadratic equations. So it should be in your mind that as long as I say quadratic equation, I don't just use a calculator. I have to first show the method. Failure to list angles within the required range. So only angles in the required range are the ones needed. You exceed, it is not okay. You write less than the required ones, it is not okay. Failure to use trigonometric identities to have found in the mathematical tables. So the logbook is there for you. Make sure you use it. Failure to consider the plus or minus square roots and not giving angles within the given range. So this year had that challenge. Students in that year had that challenge. Not observing the given range of formats. So if they want the range in radians, the final answer should be in radians. You can also try to look at those years. And failure to factorize. So if they give you like sine x and cos, for example, cos x equal to sine x, some students will say, but this sine and this sine can cancel. The moment you do that, already the marks have gone. What we expect at that point is factorization. So for our formula, the challenge is failure to compare coefficients of cos theta and sine theta correctly. And that is difficulty in following the procedure for maximum value. You should look at this here. So sometimes they can want you to get the maximum value and the angle for which the maximum occurs, or the minimum value and the angle for which the minimum occurs. So you have to follow the correct procedure. Another challenge is over approximation of square roots. So in the year 2019, the R was root of 85. But what students did, they said, why don't I round off to 9.0? That makes everything not okay. So if the square root is not a perfect square, it is better to leave the square root on your answer. Otherwise, it will be premature approximation. And our formula. For compound angle, the challenge is failure to expand using the relevant compound angle identity. Still, it goes back to using a logbook. For vectors, one question comes in section A, one section B, and the common challenges are 1. Dotting and getting a vector instead of a scalar. So you should know that when you dot two vectors, what you get must be a scalar. If you write a vector after dotting, then marks have already gone. The next is writing vectors without vector symbols. So this is very vital. More common, but students lose marks. Then another challenge is failure to identify converging and diverging vectors to find angles. So in this year, they wanted angle between RPQ. So RPQ, it means that you have to write your P here and R here and Q here. So diverging means the arrow are moving away from a common point. Therefore, you are supposed to use PQ and PR and PQ. If you use PR and QP, that is already not okay. Then misquoting the standard equation of a plane was a challenge in this year of 2020. Then using the formula for potential distance of a point from a plane in this year was a challenge, yet it is there in your logbooks. Omission of negative signs in the normal and direction vectors, especially when you're writing the dot product. This is why they put magnitude. So some students, if it's negative 2, they just put 2 squared, but it should be negative 2 squared. So obtaining the angle between the line and the normal to the plane instead of the angle between the line and the plane. That was vectors. What about geometry? For geometry, the common challenges are 1. Candidates don't know the relationship between perpendicular lines. So coordinate geometry 1 is a geometry covered in senior 5. So you need to know that the relationship between perpendicular lines. That the gradients, product of the gradient is equal to -1. Then failure to apply the formula for perpendicular distance of a point from a line. So these formulas are there in your logbooks, but in 2019, some candidates failed that question. Then generate the equation, failure to generate the equation for the angle between two lines. So angle between two lines is also needed and is examinable. If you look at 2019 of question 9b. For circles, what this students is solving simultaneous equations. So some students lost marks here because they couldn't solve the equations simultaneously. For parabolas, it is failure to complete squares. So complete squares is needed in math 1. So you have to know it by all means. So some students in this year lost marks because of that. Another is failure to recognize the standard equation and vertex of a parabola. So that has been math 1. What about math 2? So math 2 shall start with mechanics. Mechanics, like I told you, it has 3 parts. Kinematics deals with motion, but there is no force, and the formulas are motion in a straight line, vertical motion under gravity, projectile motion, and relative motion. Part 2 is statics. Statics has forces but no motion. One is resolving, equilibrium of a particle, moments and couples, equilibrium of liquid bodies. Then part 3, I think you said that there are just four topics for your year. After your year, then they will increase, but for your year, there are just four topics in each part. So each part you understand, just be assured of one question in section A and one in section B. For dynamics, we have Newton's laws of motion, connected particles, work, energy and power, and momentum. So now we shall go to the general remarks briefly about mechanics. One is that all units should be to the same SI unit. You have to change. Then 2 is that any question with units must be emphasized with those units at the end. For example, if the velocity is in kilometers per hour and you change to meters per second, at the very end you have to convert it back to kilometers per hour. Diagrams must be drawn with a new ruler. This one, very many students lose marks because of it. Then diagrams should be big enough in mechanics to avoid straining the examiner's eyes. Then direction of forces must be emphasized with an arrow. Don't just draw a line. There should be an arrow to show the direction, because force is a vector quantity. Then G must be equal to 9.8 unless specified. So most students who do physics, they write G as 9.81 and they lose marks because of that. Then vector mechanics is best approached by column vector approach. Otherwise, vector symbols must be emphasized. So the only way to bypass the vector symbols of I, J, K is to write a column vector. That was mechanics. What about numerical methods? So numerical methods, the topics can be divided into 2 parts. One is interpolation, extrapolation, errors, and trapezium rule. So there a question must come. Then the other part is root location, Newton-Raphson method, and flowcharts. So also there a question has to come. One question in section A and one in section B. The general remarks is that 1, we shall go through topic by topic. For interpolation, some students want to round off. So usually they give values in a table. So if the value is into 2 decimal places here, what students do, they also want to round off to 2 decimal places, but that is not okay. You have to maintain the rule that if accuracy is not given, answer has to be to 4 decimal places. Then another comment is about the expression of fx and f prime x. Most students confuse them. So this one is the same as this. Some students confuse it and they think when they give this, it means this 0.34 is x, and they want fx, which is not okay. Now we shall go to errors. 1 is that all errors are positive and never negative. So if you calculate, for example, relative error, percentage error, absolute error, and get a negative value, just know something is wrong somewhere. The maximum value and minimum value can be negative, but the error can never be negative. Then about errors, you need to remember that errors can only be eliminated by correct assumption. And in that we should know that errors only approximate to 0, but they never tend to 0. In error propagation, now errors is divided into 2 parts. There's a part which involves arithmetics, that is getting maximum, minimum, working value, like that. And another part which involves deriving or showing. They give you 2 variables and they say, show that the relative error in x over y is given by this. So that is what we call error propagation. So when we are dealing with error propagation, you should remember that error is equal to exact minus approximate. So in this platform already there's a video on errors. You can go through it and find out more. And in this case, relative error is absolute error over approximate. Now this word relative error differs from topic to topic, meaning that before you code the formula, you have to know which part you are dealing with. For example, in error propagation, you have seen that it is absolute over approximate. What about in error arithmetics? There it is maximum error over working value, where maximum error is maximum minus minimum divided by 2. What about in trapezium rule? In trapezium rule, it is absolute error over exact. I think you realize here it was error over approximate, here it is over exact. So you should first know the topic you are in, then you can quote a correct formula. Another point we should note is that if a question requires interval or range within which a given expression lies, it implies that the minimum and maximum values must be enclosed in box bracket, or you should use inequalities. So you put a box bracket, you put your minimum value, comma, maximum value. But if the question requires limits, it implies that you have to state upper limit and lower limit. Then trapezium rule, what you need to know, the very first thing is that h can never be approximated. It should be left in fraction form, or if it has no exact decimal. If the decimal is, if h is 0.5, it is okay. But if it is, for example, 1 over 3, then you can't round off. You only write as 1 over 3. If it is pi over 2, don't say pi is 22 over 7. No, it should be left as pi over 2. Accuracy must be boosted. In trapezium rule, we tabulate values of x and y. We tabulate x values, y values. Now these y values, accuracy has to be boosted. If they want the answer to 3 decimal places, the values tabulated should be to 5 decimal places. What the concept to use is that add 2 more decimal places. Then if the integral is a trig function, the calculator must be set to radian mode. Most students forget that, but the calculator has to be in radians if there's a trig function. So you should also be able to know how to use the standard integrals in your math logbooks. So approximate value, there are 2 values, there's approximate and exact. The approximate is the one you get by trapezium rule, the formula for trapezium rule, and the exact is one got by calculus techniques or quoting the standard integrals. What we need to know is that both the approximate and the exact must have the same accuracy. Now here they can trick you and put part A, they want the approximate, and they give you the accuracy 3 decimal places. Then part B, they just tell you to calculate the exact value. They don't give the accuracy. What you need to remember is that the accuracy must be the same for both, meaning even the exact you must have 3 decimal places. So if a question of getting the approximate value has 6 marks, now usually questions of trapezium rule which come in section A are 5 marks, but the ones which come in section B are 6 marks. So what does that mean? It means that the 6th mark will be got by first stating the value from which the required accuracy was got. For example, if they want the accuracy to 3 decimal places, that is where the A1 will be. But before you get the A1, they need this B1, where you first write the value to 5 decimal places or more. Then you round off. So if a question talks, sometimes they can tell you to state or to suggest how the error may be reduced. So there you have to first look at the question. If it was talking about ordinates, then you also use the word ordinates. If it was talking about subinterval, you use the word subinterval. That was trapezium rule. Now we shall go to graphical root location. Here we are very sensitive. One is that you have to tabulate plottable values. If I look at the values of tabulated in the table and they have 3 decimal places, then it is never okay. They should have a maximum of 2 decimal places. Then 2 is that a minimum of 5 plottable points is required. If you use less than 5, already must have gone. Then axes must be labeled. Here we do not compromise. If axes are not labeled, however good the graph is, everything is off. Then from the axes, the next thing we look at is the scale. It has to be uniform according to the given range. And from the scale, we look at the curve. It must be reasonably smooth and labeled. From the curve, we look at the estimations. Estimation should be put on the graph paper. Now, why do we say so? It is because some students, after drawing, for example, you have drawn this and this, you have got this intersection, you take your dotted line down here. We expect you to write here the word root equal to root approximately equal to, then you write the value on the graph paper, so that by all means the examiner will see the root you have read. The Newton-Raphson method, here there are 2 comments which are common. One is that all roots must be substituted the same number of decimal places. If you choose 5, make sure you use 5 throughout. x1, x0, x1, x2, x3, all must have 5 decimal places. Then the derivative should be for this and not this. So this one, many students lose very many marks because of that point. When it comes to flowcharts, the shapes matter a lot. And 2, the dry run must have only numerical values. Some students want to put a column which has yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. That is never okay. Then another belief that for flowcharts involving Newton-Raphson, the initial values in the read statement must first be written before performing a dry run. So before you tabulate here, you have to go back to your flowchart and look at the read. Whatever they told you to read must first be written here before you tabulate. Okay, that was numerical methods. Now we shall go to statistics and probability, where 3 questions come in section A and 3 in section B. So the topics can also be distributed in 2 parts. Part 1 has elementary statistics, price indices, and correlation. The question must come. Then the next part has continuous random variables. Here you ignore a uniform distribution because it was abridged, normal distribution, and the third part has discrete random variables and binomial distribution. Others can be probability theory and permutation. So if you cover this one is the basic we expect everyone to know. Followed by, after knowing that, you can go to this. After that, you can go to this, and after that, you can go to this. But if you can know the first 3, the better. So common challenges, elementary statistics. Remember the graphs there are ogives and histograms. So for ogives, these are some of the challenges. Candidates cannot determine the mid-mark X for classes. Remember ogives, they can ask also for the mean. They can tell you to draw an ogive and also calculate the mean. So calculate the mean needs the value of X. And most students fail to get values of X, especially for open classes. Then others fail to accurately compute effects and correct sum. So that comes from using a calculator. Some use non-linear scale. So if the scale is non-linear, all marks have gone. Then others use a ruler instead of freehand to draw an ogive. There we have no compromise. We have to just cross. Then estimation of the middle 40% on the ogive is a challenge. So nowadays, Uneb has got another term to ask for percentiles. It just uses the word middle 40% range, middle 70% range, middle 60%, like that. So you have to know what it means. Otherwise, questions of percentiles will fail you. The ones for histograms, still, if they ask for mean, midpoints is a challenge. And frequency density, histogram, you must get frequency density, especially or when the class widths are unequal. And for A-level, class widths will always be unequal in case they ask for histogram. Some candidates fail to choose suitable scale. So when you choose the wrong scale, already marks have gone. Others cannot locate the mode. So some students have a formula which is very funny, a way of estimating the mode. What they do, they join this point to this point and this point to this point. That is never allowed. So follow the correct approach and you get the mode correctly. For price indices, one is that we should know that all these mean the same. Weighted average price index, weighted price index, cost of living index, and composite index, they all mean the same and they have one formula. So they can just change the word to twist, but they all have the same formula. The other one is weighted aggregate, which is different and has this formula. What you need to know is that the percentage sign is only put on the comment. Here there is no percentage sign. The another thing is that if the question uses year 2017 equal to 100, if you see this word equal to 100, just know that this is the base year. For correlation and scalar diagrams, we shall start with calculations. Ranking must be done carefully. So this is a question which comes and we expect you to get total marks by all means. So ranking must be done carefully, especially when there are repeated values, and for your case, repeated values will always be there. Subtraction must be done carefully using a calculator. Then also squares must be obtained using a calculator. Some students want to use their mental work, but that is not okay because you may mess up along the way and you miss all the marks. We shall not be there to say maybe he wanted to mean this. No. Then the formula must be quoted from the mathematical table. Some students quote the formula wrongly, yet it is there in your math logbooks. There we have no excuse. We have to just cross. Then Spearman, this I've already talked about it, that should be in decimal and never a fraction. For the part of commenting, we have to use a mathematical table to comment whether it's significant or insignificant. So if the calculated value is bigger than the magnitude of the table value, then we use the word significant. If it is not, we use the word insignificant. As simple as that. So the comment must be brief. For negative quotients, remember that we take magnitudes. I think you see it here. Then for the graphs, axes have to be labeled. That is a must. Then if the question specifies what should be on the vertical and what should be on the horizontal. So some questions in the values of the tablet, you see the word X and Y. That means that they have restricted you what should be on the Y axis and what should be on the X axis. In those years they specified. The line of best fit must obey 3 conditions. The first condition is that it should go through the main point. That is 1. 2, it should pass through any other one or more points plotted. And the last one is that it must leave equal or almost equal points on either side. We already saw that in the video of correlation and scatter diagrams. When you go to random variables, I'm just giving highlights. The list of formula in the math logbook must be used. Then you should be able to distinguish between PDF and CDF for both discrete and continuous. And also sketching graph, distinguish between curves and lines. You should know what is a curve, and what a curve is what is drawn by freehand, and a straight line is drawn by a ruler. So you should be able to distinguish, and remember to label each curve. For binomial, what I can say that if n is greater than 20, then we have to use continuity correction to approximate to normal. There, if you choose to use binomial formula, it will never be okay. For normal distribution, we are sensitive on decimal places. Z value, it is a must, 3 decimal places, unless it is an exact decimal. For example, 0.5, 1.25, that is okay. But if they have many decimal places, you must round off to 3 decimal places. Then when using a mathematical table, probabilities must be written to 4 decimal places. And when you're using a calculator, there we don't round off. When you're using a calculator, if the calculator gives you a value to 6 decimal places, write all the 6. If it gives a value to 5, write all the 5. And lastly, if you have been able to watch all my videos, just know that you have received the best, irrespective of whether you are in an urban school or a rural school, or whether you are in town or in a remote village, and therefore you can compete nationwide. Some students have low self-esteem because of the schools where they are studying in. They think that their schools, if it's in a rural area, they cannot compete with those in the urban areas, but that is not okay. So in this platform, we have not distinguished any corner that this is for urban students, this is for rural students, or this is for students in town, and this is for students in remote villages. All content has been equally distributed. Therefore, if you have been using it, just know that you have received the same content both for urban students and for rural students, and therefore you can easily compete or ably compete. So go with a high self-esteem, and I know you'll be able to get the grade you want. Otherwise, I wish you excellence in your forthcoming exams, and if you get good marks, remember to call and also thank me. If you buy from me e.t.c, the better.